How do you deal with that as a family?
Well, we don't, in many respects, need to deal with it.
No one inside Windsor expected Princess Anne to be the person who finally drew the line. But when she entered a closed family meeting carrying a slim red folder tied to Diana's royal legacy, the atmosphere changed instantly. Camilla expected another discussion. Instead, Anne delivered a decision that threatened her influence, her standing, and everything she believed secured. This was not a warning. It was a reckoning, decades in the making. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne placed the folder on the table and refused the chair waiting for her. Camilla watched closely. Charles sat between his sister and his wife, while Prince William remained silent. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, came with purpose. She announced that the Queen Consort would be removed from a fictional royal heritage initiative handling Diana's private letters, belongings, and commemorative material. The decision, she said, already had family backing. Camilla stared at her in disbelief. She had expected procedure, not the loss of her authority. Anne did not soften the message. Diana's memory, she said, would never again be edited for convenience. The words made the disagreement personal. The Queen understood that this was about trust, and Anne believed that trust had been broken. Charles shifted but stayed silent. He wanted to defend his wife, yet his sister reminded him that silence during old wounds had created consequences that never disappeared. The king lowered his eyes. William noticed. He also saw that the folder held copied instructions, timestamps, correspondence, and written approval, reversing the disputed changes. The prince understood his aunt had prepared for resistance. Anne then revealed the most dangerous detail. An internal instruction had ordered personal Diana-related items removed from an upcoming heritage display, and the authorization trail led toward Camilla's office. The heritage display was a planned exhibition preserving family objects for public viewing. That mattered because these pieces carried Diana's own words, memories, and connection to her sons. Camilla reached for the red folder. Anne covered it with one hand and told her she would receive a copy after the meeting. The Queen froze. No shouting followed. Yet the gesture landed harder than anger. Control of the room had shifted completely. Anne finally turned to Charles and delivered the warning that changed everything. This had not begun with the recent instruction, she said. Something older involving Diana's legacy had pushed her here. To understand why she would risk a rupture with her brother and Camilla, the story had to move beyond that folder and into the loyalties buried beneath it. Behind every royal confrontation lies something more dangerous than protocol: memory. For Anne, Diana represented an unresolved chapter that time had never buried. For Camilla, the past was the shadow she had spent years trying to outlive. And for Charles, both women stood on opposite sides of an emotional fault line stretching across decades. Now history had returned, and nobody in that family could escape what it demanded. Anne had never built her reputation on dramatic gestures. She valued duty, discipline, and control, which made her intervention more unsettling than an emotional outburst. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, rarely challenged family decisions without a reason she considered serious. Camilla understood that immediately. The Queen Consort had spent years building acceptance inside the monarchy, and Diana's memory remained capable of reopening wounds she believed had closed. Anne remembered Diana differently. She did not reduce her to a perfect symbol or tragic legend. She remembered a complicated woman carrying extraordinary pressure inside a system that often demanded silence when compassion was needed. That was why this fight mattered. In Anne's mind, death should have ended the institutional struggle surrounding Diana, not created a chance for others to quietly reshape what remained. Charles found his sister alone after the Windsor meeting and spoke without advisors nearby. He told Anne that punishing Camilla would not repair the past. She held his gaze and answered that this was not punishment for what happened years ago. It was about stopping the past from being rewritten now. The king said nothing, but the distinction disturbed him, because he knew his sister was not speaking from impulse. William had his own reason for becoming colder. The prince learned that several disputed items included handwritten reflections from his mother, words connected to her hopes for her sons. He was shaken that decisions about those materials had moved forward without consulting either son first. For the future king, The issue had stopped being about palace procedure. It had become about who had the right to handle Diana's voice after her death. Camilla sensed something worse was hidden. She privately asked an aide which records Anne had obtained, but the answer was uncertain. That silence frightened her more than any accusation. She suspected the red folder contained evidence reaching further back than one recent instruction. Anne knew exactly where it led. Weeks earlier, during a heritage planning session, Camilla had made one decision involving Diana that she could neither excuse nor forget. That moment became the true point of no return, when a seemingly small instruction turned an old wound into a battle over who controlled Diana's memory. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a sentence spoken almost casually across a polished table. Weeks before Anne confronted Camilla, a private planning meeting had been convened to discuss a future royal heritage exhibition. Diana's name appeared repeatedly in the material. Then Camilla studied one proposed display, paused, and made a decision so coldly practical that Anne would later remember every word, and exactly how silent the room became afterward. Camilla made that decision during the fictional Windsor Heritage Review on June 17th. The review was an internal planning session used to decide which royal objects, letters, and personal records would appear in a public exhibition. She instructed staff to remove a handwritten letter from Diana and several personal photographs, arguing that the display should focus on the institution, not old emotional divisions. Anne understood immediately why that mattered. Anne knew the letter was not ordinary memorabilia. Diana had written about William and Harry, and about her hope that both sons would one day find peace inside the monarchy. Removing it would not simply change an exhibition. It would erase one of the most personal links between the late princess and the children whose lives had been shaped by her loss. Anne turned to Camilla and asked one direct question. Had William approved this? The queen consort answered no. The princess royal pushed her chair backward and said nothing should be removed until Diana's sons were told. Camilla refused to retreat, insisting that every royal exhibition required difficult editorial choices. Anne replied that editorial judgment became something else when the person making it had a history with the woman being edited out. A heritage official approached Anne after the meeting and spoke to her privately. He told her that this was not the first request involving Diana-related material. Several earlier changes, he said, had traveled through the same administrative chain. That documented account changed everything. Anne stopped thinking about one disputed display and started thinking about a pattern. Anne requested dated copies of every alteration linked to Diana's material. What came back disturbed her. Items had been downgraded, relocated, or removed more than once. That evening, she sat alone with the handwritten letter, reread the passage about William and Harry, closed the folder, and wrote 4 words beside it. This ends now. Anne contacted William the next morning, then Charles. By the time Camilla understood the heritage dispute had become a family crisis, the meeting at Windsor was already privately arranged. There would be no aides, no intermediaries, and nowhere to hide. The paperwork had given Anne evidence. What came next would force every unresolved emotion surrounding Diana into the same room. When the doors closed, royal politeness survived for less than 5 minutes. Camilla arrived prepared to defend an administrative decision. Anne arrived carrying years of restrained judgment. Charles tried to keep the discussion procedural, while William remained silent. Then Diana's letter was placed between them. What followed was a debate over an exhibition. It became a collision between memory, loyalty, guilt, and the woman Anne believed had finally pushed history one step too far. Anne placed Diana's handwritten letter beside the documented removal instruction and asked Camilla directly why it had been targeted. No aides were present. Charles sat at the end of the table, while William listened from across the room. The removal instruction was an internal written order directing staff to exclude material from the planned heritage display. That mattered because this was not a casual suggestion. Someone had tried to decide which parts of Diana's voice the public would be allowed to encounter. Camilla defended herself firmly. She said she had been trying to protect the monarchy from reopening emotional divisions that had scarred the family for decades. The queen consort argued that the exhibition should look forward, not pull Britain back into reckoning over Diana. Anne listened until she finished. Then the princess royal answered, "You do not get to erase her in the name of protecting us." Charles felt the room change. The king understood that his sister was not asking for an adjustment. Anne told Camilla that whatever tensions had existed when Diana was alive, she had been William and Harry's mother. Decisions about that legacy could not be made around her sons, as though their connection were inconvenient. William finally broke his silence through the private family meeting itself. The prince said he had reviewed the disputed material and wanted the letter restored. Camilla turned toward him in shock. Until that moment, she had believed the fight belonged mainly to herself and Anne. Now the future king had chosen a side. Camilla looked to Charles for support. He gave her none. The monarch said only that William's position had to be respected. She slowly removed her glasses, placed them beside the folder, and asked Anne what she actually wanted. Anne slid a prepared page across the table. It required Camilla to surrender oversight of every Diana-related heritage decision and reverse each disputed alteration. The queen did not sign. She stood, left the room, and closed the door behind her. Anne did not follow. She knew the real decision now belonged to Charles. He could shield his wife, or he could let her influence collapse. What happened next would turn a family quarrel into something far more dangerous again. For Charles, the crisis had suddenly become brutally simple. Defend Camilla, and he risked appearing to dismiss William's connection to his mother. Support Anne, and he would personally weaken the woman who had stood beside him through years of hostility. There was no painless option. Yet inside the monarchy, indecision could become a decision of its own. As the king read the documents alone, he discovered that family loyalty could no longer protect everyone at once. Charles understood the limits immediately. Anne could not remove a queen consort by personal command, because that title belonged to the wife of the reigning monarch, and was not something his sister could simply cancel. But the Princess Royal had built something almost as powerful inside this dispute. William's support, documented evidence, and enough family agreement to strip Camilla of influence over Diana's heritage material if the king approved it. William spoke to his father privately and made his position painfully clear. The prince said he wanted no revenge, no public humiliation, and no fresh scandal. He wanted one guarantee: nobody would ever again make a unilateral decision about Diana's personal legacy without consulting her sons. Charles heard the restraint in his voice, and that made the demand harder to reject. Charles returned to his study and reread the chain of decisions Anne had collected. He stopped at the instruction concerning Diana's handwritten letter, removed his glasses, and left the page untouched for several minutes. The king knew why it mattered. This was not merely an exhibition dispute. It concerned a mother's own words, and the sons who had lived with her absence. Camilla entered expecting him to condemn Anne's methods. Instead, Charles told her the original decision was indefensible, because William should have been consulted. The queen consort went still. She had expected criticism from others, but not from the husband she believed would stand between her and the consequences. Anne then sent Charles her final terms in a documented family memorandum, a written internal agreement setting out the safeguards everyone would follow. Restore the removed material. End Camilla's direct heritage oversight. Require William's approval for Diana-related decisions. King create a review process no single household could override. Charles hesitated through the night, then signed. He handed the agreement to Anne himself. When she asked whether she had gone too far, the king answered, "I think we all went too far a long time ago." Camilla received the notice without argument. She folded it, dismissed her aide, and remained alone. Anne had won the institutional battle, but behind that closed door, losing was about to become deeply personal, and the queen's next choice would change the emotional direction of everything. There were no cameras when Camilla received the final decision. No crowd watched her absorb the words. No ceremonial announcement marked the moment when a sphere of influence she had taken years to build disappeared with a signature. She simply stood inside a private room holding a single page. And for all the explosive confrontations that had come before it, the most revealing moment in the entire crisis may have been what she did when nobody else was watching. Camilla learned quickly that the consequences were already moving. Heritage staff received revised instructions restoring Diana's letter, photographs, and every disputed piece. Future decisions about those materials would require consultation with William's representatives, meaning the people authorized to speak for the prince on matters connected to his mother. The queen consort had not lost her title or constitutional place. Anne's victory concerned influence, trust, and control inside this fictional heritage dispute, which made the defeat painfully personal. Camilla sat without removing her coat. She read Charles's signed decision twice, then placed the page face down. Anger came first. Humiliation followed. The Queen understood that her husband had sided with Anne and William, not by removing her from royal life, but by formally rejecting her judgment where Diana's legacy was concerned. Charles came to her later and tried to explain. The king said he had acted to protect both the family and his son. Camilla answered that everyone seemed willing to forgive the dead while permanently judging the living. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Nothing he could say would make the decision feel less like abandonment to her. Anne faced a different choice when a communications advisor suggested language that would make Camilla's retreat unmistakable. The Princess Royal rejected it. She wanted Diana protected, not another woman publicly destroyed. Revenge, she believed, had limits. That decision mattered because Anne could have turned victory into humiliation, yet she chose restraint when cruelty would have been easier. Camilla surprised Charles next. Through a private written request, she asked to read the Diana letter that had triggered the crisis. The monarch hesitated, then agreed. The Queen sat alone with the page and reached the passage about William and Harry. Her expression tightened. She read it again, returned the letter, and requested no alteration. Camilla then wrote Anne a message by hand. It contained only 4 words. "Speak to me alone." The Princess Royal accepted. No advisors would attend. No husband would mediate. No son would stand between them. And no palace machinery could soften anything. The battle had been fought through files, authority, and old wounds. Now 2 women would face the one subject neither had ever truly escaped: Diana. There were no lawyers, advisors, secretaries, or husbands in the room. Anne arrived first. Camilla followed moments later and closed the door herself. For perhaps the first time since the confrontation began, neither woman had an audience to convince. There was no institution to hide behind and no document to weaponize. Only 2 people remained. One determined to defend Diana's memory, the other exhausted from living beneath it. What happened next changed the meaning of Anne's victory. Camilla asked why the dispute had become so personal. Anne did not answer quickly. The Princess Royal, the senior title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, told her that the family had survived Diana's death without ever fully confronting what silence, pride, and emotional avoidance had cost them. She had watched pain become protocol, then watched protocol become distance. That was why this mattered now. Anne made her motive even clearer. She said she had never believed Diana was flawless, and she had no interest in turning memory into sainthood. But the late princess could no longer defend her own words, belongings, or relationship with her sons. Someone had to make sure those things were not reshaped simply because they remained uncomfortable. Camilla finally admitted what she had hidden. The Queen Consort said Diana's place in British memory had sometimes made her feel that every acceptance she earned could disappear the moment the past returned. That fear, she confessed in their private conversation, had influenced the heritage decision more than she wanted to admit. Anne listened, then answered with painful precision. Fear could explain a decision without excusing it. Camilla looked away, but she did not argue. Then she told Anne she would not appeal the restrictions or ask Charles to restore her authority later. She also agreed that William should control decisions involving deeply personal material connected to his mother. The surrender was voluntary now, and that changed everything. Anne answered with a confession of her own. She admitted that she carried regret about Diana too. There had been moments, she said, when the family saw distress and answered with discipline instead of compassion. Her intervention was partly an attempt to ensure that same coldness was not repeated after death. Camilla stood to leave, paused at the door, and told Anne she had already instructed staff to restore every disputed item without modification. The Princess Royal gave one nod. No forgiveness was declared, but the war was over. By the following morning, the settlement had reached the national press. Inside Windsor, the confrontation had cooled. Outside the gates, Britain was about to turn Anne's private stand into a public reckoning over Diana, all over again, once more. By sunrise, the story no longer belonged to Windsor. Diana's name was back where it had lived so often, in headlines, television studios, crowded conversations, and the emotional memory of a country that had never completely agreed on what she represented. But this time, the central figure was not Charles, William, or Harry. It was Anne. Britain awoke to the astonishing idea that the monarchy's most unsentimental royal had drawn the hardest line in Diana's defense. Anne watched the reaction spread without celebrating it. The Princess Royal had led the intervention that ended Camilla's oversight of Diana-related heritage decisions, and palace language confirmed the change in deliberately restrained terms. Heritage oversight meant authority over how historic royal letters, objects, and personal material were handled for exhibitions. That mattered because the decision now affected who controlled some of the most sensitive parts of Diana's story. Camilla became the center of an argument she could no longer control. Some commentators treated the Queen Consort's retreat as overdue protection of Diana's historical record. Others warned that reopening old wounds could drag the monarchy backward when stability was desperately needed. She heard both interpretations, knowing neither captured the private conversation that had finally ended the conflict. William watched television coverage from Kensington Palace in silence. The prince remained composed until an old photograph of Diana with her sons appeared during a discussion about the restored letter. He switched the television off. There was no anger in the gesture. The future king simply could not watch his mother become a national argument again. Charles absorbed the cost differently. The king read the morning coverage and saw comparisons he had hoped the family had finally escaped. He called Anne privately and said only, "It's everywhere." She answered, "I know." The monarch understood that a decision intended to contain one dispute had reopened decades of public memory. Anne refused every invitation to turn herself into Diana's avenger. She declined interviews and public explanations, even as word spread that the handwritten letter would remain in the exhibition. That single page became symbolic, because it carried Diana's own reflections about William and Harry, giving the controversy a human center no palace statement could match. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. Someone placed a handwritten card among the flowers. Her words still belonged to her sons. Broadcasters returned to that message repeatedly, and William heard about it before the day ended. Britain had delivered its emotional reaction. Now Anne, Camilla, Charles, and William faced the harder verdict. What remained when the headlines faded, and whether this reckoning had protected Diana's memory without breaking the family again. In the end, Princess Anne did take Camilla down, but not in the way the most dramatic headlines suggested. She did not remove a crown, destroy a marriage, or banish anyone from royal life. She did something quieter and more consequential. She drew a boundary around Diana's memory and forced the family to admit that history could not be managed because it remained uncomfortable. Once that boundary was accepted, there was no going back. Anne watched the arrangements settle into place without celebration. Diana's handwritten letter, photographs, and disputed personal pieces were restored exactly as intended. The Heritage Collection, a curated group of royal objects preserved for public understanding, would now include those materials without alteration. William received authority to approve personal content concerning his mother, giving him a voice that should never have been bypassed. Camilla accepted the consequence without another fight. The Queen Consort stepped away from the project and did not ask Charles to restore her authority later. Her defeat was real, but it no longer looked like resistance. She had lost control over Diana's legacy, yet she chose restraint instead of reopening the conflict. Anne felt no triumph. The Princess Royal understood that protecting a dead woman's memory could never erase the pain that woman had experienced while alive. It could only stop another wrong from being added afterward. That distinction mattered because this had never truly been about revenge. It was about responsibility. Charles finally confronted that truth in a conversation with his sister. The king thanked Anne for forcing the family to face something he had hoped time would settle on its own. She answered that time does not settle everything. Sometimes it only makes silence easier. He did not argue. Camilla then sent William a message before the collection opened. She told the prince she would respect whatever boundaries he set concerning Diana. He did not reply immediately, but he kept the message. That quiet choice marked the end of the confrontation more clearly than any public statement could have done. William understood what Anne had protected. His mother's story would no longer be reshaped without the involvement of the sons who had lived through its consequences. The future king inherited not just authority but responsibility. Anne had challenged Camilla, confronted Charles, and risked family unity, but her final victory was not vengeance. Camilla accepted the boundary, Charles upheld it, and William became guardian of Diana's personal legacy. The monarchy moved forward under one clear understanding: moving on would never again require Diana to disappear. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.